Yay.
So welcome, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's 2022 Minnesota Air Quality Information and Outlook. This will be hosted by our meteorologists and staff, along with myself, Daniel, Executive Supervisor of the team, David Brown, Matt Taraldsen, and Nick Witcraft. And we're gonna go on and one of the things I want to make sure is that all of you are here invited because we found you as valuable partners of our communication dissemination of information about air quality, especially after the 2021 season, as we all remember, with the wildfire smoke and the air quality issues we had. All of you were valuable partners to get that information out to help get the information to the state of Minnesota and beyond for citizens experiencing air quality issues. Today, we're going to talk about, for 30 minutes, we're going to cover three main topics: the AQI, Air Quality Index. What is it? People still ask. And so we're going to give an overview of what exactly that means, and also how we do air quality forecasts, how we issue alerts, which is a little bit different art than your standard general weather. Every type has severe weather, marine weather, aviation, and there's air quality. They're all different and unique, but have very much similarities when it comes to meteorology. So David Brown will be talking about that. And then Matt Taraldsen will be covering the historic 2021 season, a good overview of what happened, what took place, and essentially leading up to the events for this year and our expanded coverage and improvement, our partnerships with many different entities, and how that's going to continue moving forward. And finally, the outlook for the 2022 air quality season, looking at a variety of outlooks from precipitation and temperature, drought, wildfire forecast by the experts out there that we look to for that information to help with our air quality forecasts and outlooks. Just a reminder, we've all been doing this long enough. Please keep your camera off, mic muted for questions at the end of the time. And then we will have a Q&A session when we are completed with that. So onward, just a quick reminder, next week is Air Quality Awareness Week, May 2nd through 6th. This is sponsored by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the theme is Be Air Aware and Prepared. And we are definitely flying along with that for sure, to be letting you all know about AQI, preparing, and then helping to prepare the public, as we count on you as a big communicator for the state, for the MPCA. The topics are going to be starting Monday, wildfire and smoke, and going each day to Friday, asthma and your health, citizen science and sensors, environmental justice and air quality, and finally with air quality around the world. So look for press releases and follow at MPCA_AQI for more, starting next Monday, May 2nd. And with that, I'm going to send it off to David to talk about the AQI.
Hello, everyone. So the Air Quality Index is the foundation of our forecasts and alerts. Air pollution levels are reported on this color scale to communicate adverse health impacts, populations affected, and recommended precautions. There are 6 color categories ranging from green for the best air quality to maroon, which is the poorest. The AQI is applied to each pollutant regulated by the Clean Air Act, and the categories are linked to each health standard. The MPCA produces air quality forecasts for ozone, which is a colorless, odorless gas that generally occurs during the summer, and fine particles, also known as PM2.5, which can occur throughout the year. The air quality index for ozone is for 8-hour averages of measured levels, and for fine particles, the air quality index is for daily averages of measured levels. The MPCA will issue an air quality alert when the AQI is expected to reach the orange category or higher, and this is the level when sensitive individuals may begin to experience adverse health impacts. Sensitive individuals include people with heart and lung conditions, children, and the elderly. And everyone can be impacted when air quality reaches the red or higher category. Much like how weather forecasters predict the weather, rain or shine, the MPCA creates daily forecasts even when air quality across the state is good. And people with respiratory and heart conditions like asthma and COPD can use this information to plan their daily outdoor activities. Forecasting is very similar to weather forecasting, but with some extra challenges added in. It requires predicting weather conditions along with understanding how pollutants will be emitted, transported, and transformed in the air. And quiet weather is often the most challenging because poor air quality generally occurs when weather conditions are calm or otherwise uneventful. Another challenge is that people directly impact air quality in their area for better and for worse. This can mean changing how much air pollution is emitted into the air on a daily basis. And it can also mean that people are able to reduce their impacts and their contributions on poor air quality during alerts by taking necessary or appropriate measures. When we create a forecast, we look at a lot of different weather data. We look at synoptic models and ensembles for large scale patterns on a regional level. We also look at convective models for finer details on smaller scales. We input weather forecast data into an artificial intelligence model that uses historical relationships between weather and air pollution levels to try to predict future air quality based on the weather forecast. And when we also use other air quality models run by NOAA to help inform our forecasts. When air quality is forecast to be orange or higher and we decide to issue an alert, we begin by using GIS to draw the alert area by selecting National Weather Service forecast zones. One example shown here. A Python script then reads the GIS data and creates a National Weather Service AQI text product for each of the affected weather service offices. And the format of these products is similar to other National Weather Service products like severe thunderstorm warnings and winter storm warnings. A press release is also created for the alert event, and we're currently working to update the wording in the release and text products to better communicate health impacts and precautions for each AQI color category. We have a number of partners and platforms that help us get the word out. We rely on the Department of Health, Department of Transportation, tribal governments, the National Weather Service, EnviroFlash, social media, and our media partners to inform the public when air quality is expected to be poor. So the unprecedented wildfire smoke events of 2021 really challenged our messaging. We had to refine our press release on the fly to better communicate different health impacts and affected groups for each AQI category above orange. And we're continuing to work to improve the messaging for the 2022 wildfire season. So in 2021, we used an additional headline during the worst of the air quality in the National Weather Service text products. This will be used again, but is expected to be used extremely frequently and will highlight exceptional events on the scale of what occurred in July and August of last year. And similar to our press release, we are making changes to the wording of the National Weather Service text product to better communicate the information for multiple AQI categories when air quality impacts are expected to vary significantly across the alert area. And then one final update to share on our alert products. The alerts will be accompanied with a map showing maximum forecast AQI colors. And when applicable, it will also show sources, incidents, or fires within Minnesota by including them as icons on the map. And these updates were well received last year and will continue with our alerts going forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Taraldsen to give an overview of the 2021 wildfire season.
Thanks, David. Hello, everybody. So this part of the talk was just going to be kind of an overview of what happened in 2021. And 2021 was historic, to put it as one word. We've been issuing alerts since 2011, and last year was by far the busiest season. 2021 was challenging because it wasn't just a lot of events we had to forecast for, but the severity and the duration and the scope was really unprecedented. And we were, challenged with how to articulate events that would be high impact for multiple days across the entire state. One example of this is all the maximum daily AQI values by color code from 2009 to 2021, and you could see how far 2021 stuck out compared to the other ones. We've had a couple red days, but we're adding purple. And again, a very challenging forecast, and we really were relying on all of our partners to help get a complicated message out. In terms of all the events we had in 2021, if you remember back to February of 2021, we had some freezing fog issues that created an actual event in winter with winter stagnation. We had a couple ozone events, but then the bulk of what we saw was wildfire events, mainly from fires just across the border in Canada. And so you can see these are all the different events that we had, as well as the maximum AQI categories that occurred. This final on August 29th and 30th, that was me who issued that. We only ended up with the moderate, but that was with the Greenwood fire slowly going out. We had some helpful rain. And so again, a really challenging and unprecedented situation that developed in 2021. In terms of why we were so worried about the fires in 2021 and why we had such a bad time with everything, really starts with the fire situation in southern Canada. And this map shows the areas that have been burned, which are in orange, and then these pennants represent the satellite detected hotspots. We're using weather satellites to detect the heat sources from fires, and we can kind of tell how active fires are in lieu of ground truth reports. But you could see the last week of July in 2021, there's a huge amount of area burned up in Canada, a lot of active fires, and it really set the stage for a significant event should the winds go to the northwest. The areas that were burned were approximately 6 times the amount of the entire Twin Cities metropolitan area, a huge amount of acreage that was burned or on fire. And like I said, we just needed the meteorology to come into play to push things into Minnesota. Towards the end of July, beginning of August, that's exactly what happened. This is a high split model from NOAA. And for those who aren't meteorologists on the call, basically this model will track air masses and where they move to. We run it in reverse and we can tell where an air mass moves from. So this is southern Otter Tail County, Minnesota, going back 24 hours. And you could see the source region for the air mass that was moving into Minnesota in late July and early August is basically square on top of these fires. And so once we had this model data on hand, we knew that things were going to be pretty bad. It was just becoming now a question of how to articulate what was likely to be an unprecedented event. Here are the 24-hour station reports that we had. These are all the different MPCA stations across the state. I color-coded them by the 24-hour AQI. You could see we had 2 that were purple, but in addition to just having a daily maximum in the purple range, we had hourly, several hour concentrations in that maroon. And although the AQI is not an hourly observation, if you're outside in the afternoon when this occurred, you're definitely feeling the impacts of hazardous air quality. I also built these fun little graphs that show just how impressive that first smoke intrusion was. And it came on fast. It was very high impact. And you can see even the duration for the next several days. It remains in the alert category for some time. And it was, a really challenging event where you had several days with different peaks that were higher than what was shown here. So every one of these stations has that. And, it just shows the meteorology of what was going on that early August. Because our station density is not that high, I went through and did a spatial interpolation of what the maximum 24-hour AQI category was. And you can see that purple occurred over a wide swath of Minnesota. Eastern Minnesota had several hours that were worse than that, but largely were spared for the 24-hour continuous of the worst coverage. But a lot of places saw red and the purple, and then again within there, they had maximum hourlies above that. These are the maximum hourly observations. Again, the AQI is a 24-hour scale, but if you were outside in the afternoon of, say, August 1st, these are the types of conditions you were experiencing. And so we had a wide swath of maroon, very unhealthy, and then everyone in the state of Minnesota had unhealthy for everyone. And so it was a high impact event. It was, something that we just do not see in Minnesota and traditionally have not seen in Minnesota. And so it was really difficult to try to articulate what was going to happen. And that's why we used the wording that we used. Another thing we really tried to beef up in 2021, and we will again in 2022, is the use of social media. So we have a Twitter account at MPCA_AQI. And within that Twitter account, we try to articulate our forecasts. This is an example of smoke intrusion coming out of the Greenwood fire. And it was kind of tricky because smoke was pooling in Lake Superior and then was being cycled back into the Duluth area. So we're trying to do the best we can to kind of articulate a very tricky forecast. There was an air quality alert for all this time, but again, we had times when we knew the situation was going to be worse. And we're trying to articulate that, not just through our text products, but using maps and social media to help kind of get our message out as well. In terms of what the different events look like, starting July 5th all the way through the end of August, these were our alert maps. Again, when we were forecasting higher than orange, yellow, or red or purple, for instance, we included that in the map, but otherwise we kept the orange in for just the alert if that's what we were expecting. And so, again, very long air quality season, a lot of impacts. And what was kind of astounding is that some areas of the state were under an air quality alert for almost 30 days consecutively. So Northeast Minnesota, north of Duluth and the Arrowhead, 705 hours, which is 29 days and 9 hours of air quality alerts. This is only the second time we've alerted the entire state in an air quality alert. The first time we've done it for multiple days. But again, it wasn't just the duration. We also had our highest observations for smoke that we've had. We had the first time we've seen purple, or that very unhealthy in Minnesota. And so in all aspects, 2021 was a very difficult situation to deal with, and one that really kind of stress tested our alert process and articulating what the impacts of air quality could be. Because of all of that, there was a lot of impacts. There was a very significant amount of interest. We had 40 media interviews. We did blogs. We did live TV and radio interviews. We were setting up press briefings and featured in newspaper articles. And so behind the scenes, there was a lot that was going on besides just forecasting that our team was trying to articulate. Because of that, in 2022, when we are forecasting red or higher, we're going to initiate a media process. So there's going to be 2 media briefings. Again, these will be only for the red alert or higher. We'll still do alerts for orange or higher, but when you get to that red, when it has impacts for everybody, that's when really we started to notice that there's a lot more interest and a lot more nuance that had to go into the messaging. So we'll be doing this in 2022, and the information about those briefings will be contained in our press releases as we send them out. Another thing we developed in 2021 that will continue in 2022 is really improving and developing extensive collaboration, not just in the state, but with our surrounding agencies. So the Minnesota Department of Health has been of great assistance trying to articulate the health impacts and increasing our wording to really show the impacts of fine particle pollution and smoke. We're doing multiple briefings a week with the U.S. Forest Service to get intelligence about what the fires are doing, conditions on the ground. We stood up an interagency wildfire air quality response program, and that included U.S. Forest Service, Minnesota Incident Command, the Bad River Tribe Nation, MPCA, and then our companion agencies in Michigan and in Wisconsin DNR, Michigan Eagle. And so all of this allowed us to kind of communicate what was going on, talk meteorologist about what the forecast was, and really try to make sure that our alerts were lining up across state lines and that we're getting the most up-to-date intelligence we could from what was going on in the fire, because oftentimes what radar and what satellite will tell us will kind of be a lagging indicator. And so having some reports straight from the fire, from the crews on the ground was extremely helpful and something we want to continue should we have another fire situation in Minnesota. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Nick, who will talk about what we are thinking could happen in 2022.
Thank you, Matt. Before I talk about the outlook for 2022, I want to speak to conditions that may lead to poor air quality. So for ozone, generally warm and dry conditions favor more ozone. So not every day that's hot and sunny will have high ozone, but the more hot and sunny days you have, the more likely you might see some ozone. Also, for drought conditions favor more wildfires and smoke. And then during the winter, if we have high pressure set up overhead for several days and winds die down, you may see some high particulate during that time. Now, current drought conditions across the U.S., there's widespread severe drought in the western U.S., as that's been the case for the last several years. And then here in Minnesota, we have thankfully, the drought conditions from last summer have improved quite a bit. We have an area of abnormally dry in northern Minnesota, a little piece of drought in Lake County. And then South Minnesota, we have some abnormally dry, and then south of Albert Lee, we also have a little bit of drought. Now, comparing to last year, remember last year we had major fire, so I wanted to see how does it compare to last year. Well, we're actually sitting a little bit better. 2% of the state is in drought currently. Last year we were sitting almost at 10%. But however, if you look at the abnormally dry area, it is pretty similar. And here's how the drought tracked over the last year. So on the left side of the graph, you could see where we were, and actually we were actually not that bad as far as drought. So you really got to be careful looking at the current drought conditions, because last year we had a very dry May and June, and then the area of drought rose rapidly, where by the middle of the summer we had a large area in severe, extreme, and even exceptional drought. Now we also have to look at Canada, and actually a lot of our smoke last summer came from Canada. And this is a little bit dated. They only update this map once a month, but as of April 1st or April 12th, when they released the map, there was some drought in southern Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, even up to severe and areas of extreme drought. However, in April, it has been on the wetter side in Minnesota and parts of Canada. So hopefully heading forward, that'll improve. Now here we have the Palmer Drought Index, and this takes into account long-term dryness. And we could see, in Minnesota, there is an area of long-term dryness. It has been wet recently, but it takes a while to overcome that dryness. And in the south part of Canada, there is also dryness. And of course, the Western US continues to be very dry. And here's the latest, almost hot off the press, the Climate Prediction Center seasonal outlook. So this is their outlook for late April to end of July. And they expect actually the drought to mostly go away in northern Minnesota, but in southern Minnesota, we actually expect drought to develop. And then you could see why in the next map, or one of the maps. So this is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. So this is many models that are run across the globe, and they adjust the initial conditions, run it out for a year ahead of time, and this is the average of all those dozens of runs. And so the ensemble is predicting warmer than normal across the central US and drier than normal. So this would lend to that, lead us to believe that drought may redevelop this summer. And here's the Climate Prediction Center outlook, which takes into account that multi-model ensemble and El Nino conditions. So here, yeah, like the ensemble was suggesting, we have a large area of above normal temperatures across the US, and then below normal precipitation predicted for the upper Midwest and actually much of the central US. And I should note that this is the US Forest Service wildfire forecast, and for Minnesota, they're predicting maybe a near normal fire season, which means maybe not as active as last year, but you might see a couple fires here and there. Now the Western US, of course, they're predicting, as we've seen the last few years, a active fire season. And then Canada, the prairie provinces where we get a lot of our smoke in Western Ontario, they are predicting an above normal fire season. Now, what does that mean for Minnesota? Well, the drought conditions, maybe a tendency for more hot and sunny days. Looks like as far as ozone, we may have 3 to 5 days reaching the orange category. Normally it's about 2 to 4, so a little bit above normal. Now for the particulate impacts, that's relying on the wildfire forecast, and it looks like there may be an above normal season in Canada, which means we'll probably see a few days with impactful smoke. Hopefully not as impactful as last season, but we could expect a few days with smoke. And of course, with the dryness in the Western US, we will see smoke make it over Minnesota, but that smoke tends to stay aloft. It doesn't make it to the ground that much. So we'll see a lot of days with pretty sunsets. And it's been wet. Notice it's been wet recently. There's flooding in Crookston right now. So hopefully that will keep the fires down in northern Minnesota this year. And with that, I'll hand it back to Daniel. Dick.
So as you heard from David, Matt, and Nick, what is AQI and how we're forecasting, how we send out alerts and the impacts that has? That's really continue to help us think about the future. How can we improve our products and our graphics and the user experience, so to speak? And so we are already working on ways to improve actually adding forecast maps, which we don't have right now, and new graphics. So that's under development over the next year or two, of some ideas or some back of the napkin ideas on the left of how could we partition Minnesota in different ways. This is very early on, but we're definitely working on those tools using GIS, which we've already incorporated more into our alert process, as Matt shown, the different maps, and that will continue and improve as we have a lot of expertise in GIS. On the right, you see an image from the NASA TEMPO, which is a tropospheric emissions monitoring for pollution satellite sensor. That's going to be going up into space, I think, in December of this year. We are a early adapter member of that group working with NASA. This is basically going to be a geostationary satellite sitting over the CONUS of North America, the United States, and taking hourly images of satellite, which is something that's never been done before. It's usually like a polar orbital a couple times a day, and that's it. So it's data like that, also low-cost sensor information that we started to use in the last year or two. That's going to be more incorporated into our daily forecasting, our alert, and eventually, hopefully, we can incorporate some of that into our model work, which we've seen other agencies out in California starting to do that. So the future's bright. We are definitely working on improving and making the data better, the advanced warning better for the citizens of Minnesota. And again, we count on all you partners that we collaborate and work with to help get that information out and make it more useful for the state of Minnesota. And I think with that, we will have a question Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Daniel. So if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or just send them in the chat here and we will be sure to answer them.
And Hannah, while you had that, Hannah, if you want to scroll up and show like the links below, people might want to take a look at the different links we have for information. Maybe that can spawn a few questions as well.
And then I did want to remind everyone as well, we have Jesse Schmuel from MDH, Minnesota Department of Health, on as well if there are any questions related to the health effects of air quality. Okay, we've got one question in the chat here from two questions. First one from Ben Derry. Will there be an increase in the number of air quality sites in the future?
That's a good question. We have the regulatory monitors that we have across the state now. Some of those are also at tribal land. So they are partners in maintaining those. For the future for ozone and PM2.5, there is a push to try to add more. It is difficult, especially in the remote areas. And that's where the low-cost sensors are starting to come into play as more of those are being installed. A lot of work being done at the EPA level of how good they might actually are and can they be helpful, and we find that they are. If you go to the EPA air now site for fire and smoke out west, they use those extensively with the various air quality agencies in out west. So that's where I think the more bang for the buck is going to be in those low cost sensors, because they can be installed quickly in more remote areas. And we do have some across northern Minnesota that we are starting to install and look to work with more partners to do that, more of that in the future, because we are a little blind, as you said, Ben, to the northern border of what's coming in, because satellite surface observations, those things are great, but having sensors is another piece of the equation that we can have for better forecasting alerts.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Next question in the chat from Peter. How is Southern Canada looking? Is that probably the biggest risk for AQI here in northern Minnesota this year?
I'll take a stab.
Yeah.
Recently, during the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've had a number of storm systems track across, from the Dakotas into northern Minnesota. And so they have been very snowy recently. So the hope is when the drought outlook gets released at the next month, that we'll see a lot less dryness in southern Canada, fingers crossed. But as of the April 1st outlook, or it was looking dry up there.
Great, thank you. Next question from Diana Cruzman. Overall, you mentioned smoke in Minnesota stays aloft. Are there parts of the state where it may be more impactful on the ground than others?
I can take a stab at this one. So the fires that form in the western U.S., for the smoke to get to Minnesota, they have to go up and over the Rocky Mountains. And when that happens, that pushes the smoke obviously up over the mountains, and it will stay up there unless we get a weather system here that will push it down to the ground. And sometimes fronts can do that, but more often than not, when that does happen, we get rain. So things like a cold front will produce rain. And watch out a lot of the particulate matter before it can get down to the ground and really cause impacts. And so from the western US, that's what we're predominantly looking at. For the fires in Canada last year, because they were just 150 miles or so north of the border, that smoke did not have very far to go. And the areas that were highest impacted were areas right along the Canadian border, just because they were closer. And then we kind of had a secondary maxima area along the Red River Valley, where the smoke kind of got trapped in the Red River Valley and sat a little bit longer in areas like Moorhead, Crookston, and all the way down almost as far south as the border with South Dakota. And so that's the type of thing we'll probably see again this year. But overall, the smoke aloft is really heavily dependent on the weather situation. It's hard to say. But usually we don't have a lot of impact from the Western fires. It's the Canadian fires that are really the ones we have to watch out for and the highest impact.
There's another angle we could answer that too, is that when the smoke does envelop the state of Minnesota, obviously metropolitan areas where you're going to have more people, more concentrations of people, breathing the air, that's where we're obviously going to be very aware of that. So it's at the metropolitan areas, the bigger cities, but also northern Minnesota, there's many remote areas that had smoke trapped in the forest areas quite extensively. And we had a lot of reports from people who were up there saying it was very bad air quality. And a lot of times it was not able to, if it got trapped in the woods areas, it was hard to erode that out, or if you had a rare occasion, it was on the lakeside. And then, as Matt mentioned, in the wide valleys of the Northwest. So we keep an eye on all areas of the state, but we are cognizant of the fact of where there are more people, metropolitan areas, the Twin Cities, Rochester, St. Cloud, Mankato, Duluth, and so forth. We are definitely aware of that. Environmental justice locations and things of that nature are on our high on our list of being aware.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Next question from Pat Springer. Is there any sort of multi-state federal effort to try to prevent these massive wildfires, or are we really at the mercy of this prolonged severe drought out west waiting for it to end?
That's a great question. We don't have that formal expertise. We know the partners we have worked with in the Forest Service, in the National Interagency Fire Center, Would be a better answer. We don't have them here today, but we do know we will have them available for calls this summer for sure to better answer those questions. But it's tough. There's different practices I know in Canada versus the United States. Canada, the practice for many years was to try and put fires out as quick as possible. However, you're not letting the natural course of nature take place. And so when the fires do happen, they've been known to be higher mega fires, so they burn hotter and larger. There's more to burn, and that includes homes and houses that have been built out into these remote areas. So it's a complicated issue, and there's no real easy answer. Unfortunately, being in drought and the pattern we've been for the last many years does not help.
We got a direct message to the host. First one, will this presentation be made available on the MPCA website? We will be uploading this to our YouTube channel. So, and then we will be posting that link on the website as well. So watch for that. Second question, how is MPCA going to promote low-cost sensors in Southwest Minnesota and increase density of sensors in Northern Minnesota?
So we have a air sensor program that we are building here at the agency now, and we're starting to work partnership with schools. I know we have a few tribal nation partners that are expanding their footprint with the sensors, and that work is ongoing. We're trying to expand that footprint, so to speak, and also that expert knowledge. If people want to buy low-cost sensors, we can provide technical expertise, how they work, how they can install them, and so forth. So that is a growing program that we're working on to expand, trying to keep up with the states out west who have done extensive work, and we're looking to them for a little help and guidance how they did it, because out in California and Oregon and Washington, it's a huge impact, and so they've really taken off with that, and we desire to do the same.
Great, thanks. Next question from Karen in the chat. I've heard that fire systems can create their own weather. Did that have anything to do with the air mass bringing all that smoke down to Minnesota?
I'm gonna throw it to Nick or Matt or David.
That's a phenomenon that typically occurs on a really small scale with really large fires like what we've seen out west in California. To the best of my knowledge, they can create really small circulations similar to tornadoes, and possibly impact weather phenomena on a really small scale. But the fires that occurred in Canada, that smoke that transported south, that weather system was really what contributed to that smoke intrusion, and really wasn't impacted at all by the fires themselves.
Great. And then last question we have here in the chat from Peter. What did you see last year in Northeast Minnesota in terms of the conditions that led to such a prolonged issue with AQI? Was that just because of the Greenwood fire combined with the smoke from Canada, or do you see patterns related to the region and Lake Superior that caused the smoke to stick around?
I can take this one. Part of it was just because the closer you are to the fire, obviously, the less smoke has to travel to get to you. And so part of what we saw in northern St. Louis, Northern Lake, and Northern Cook counties was just the fact that they're close to the Greenwood fire. Around the lake, things were a little bit more difficult because you had the lake circulation. So the lake breeze would push the smoke back, and then the land breeze would kick back up in the evening, and then the smoke would kind of come back. And so areas right around the lakes, so places like Two Harbors, Silver Bay, and Duluth, there was a component just by nature of having Lake Superior there that was sort of difficult to forecast. The other side of it was that smoke would kind of spill out over the lake and then would sit there and then could get pushed down in the lake breeze down into Duluth. We didn't have any sensors out in the lake. We just were relying on satellite observations. And so that was really the crux of what was going on. If the Greenwood fire was not as close by, it wouldn't have happened. But because of, having that giant fresh body, that giant lake there, it was made a little bit worse, but by and large, it was just a function of being close to the fire, and the smoke was just right there. But the lake breeze also impacted things a bit.
We got another question in the chat from Karen. Was last year's abysmal air quality connected at all to climate change?
There's been that connection that, with the warmer climate, the drought, I think that argument is becoming stronger and stronger as each year progresses, as we look out what's going out west into the north. It's difficult because each year it can cycle. Right now we're in a La Nina pattern. So we've had more rainfall, cooler winter, longer. Well, we haven't had much of a spring, but that's continued on. However, in the bigger picture, that is I think, the feeling and the sentiment as we go down this path, that more years of this drought and heat and dryness, that the wildfire continuing, the higher ozone values starting to trend in that direction. So I think that argument is starting to become a stronger, have a stronger backing of what's going on now.
Great. Next question from Diana. Can you talk more about your partnerships with tribal air quality agencies? How do you collaborate and what are your shared goals?
So back when we took over the program, forecasting from the consultant, we expanded across the state, and we had 5 monitors, PM2.5 or ozone, that were located on tribal nation property. So we reached out and worked with them to be able to A, have that data available, and B, if we wanted to be able to produce a forecast, how they could help, with having that onto our maps, coordinating that information, each month, talking in different meetings we had. And also, if there's an air quality alert, we felt it was important to not mention just counties and cities, but if we could mention tribal nations. And at the time, nobody else was able to do that, and we had the technology with the GIS. So we worked with the tribal nations, getting their thoughts and feelings behind that, and we were able to start including them. And that really helped, I think, expand the reach for air quality awareness and alerts through different media and means through those, especially some pretty remote areas of Minnesota. And that partnership definitely is to continue, especially as more monitors might be being placed there, the sensors. I think that really helps because they were heavily hit last year in several of the locations up north with very bad air quality. And so we were in communication with them, explaining what was going on to help them so they could pass the information. And we expect the same to occur because they're farther north of Minnesota and the smoke comes from Canada. They're the first to experience those conditions. So it's important to keep that collaboration and partnership with them and get their insight and their on the ground knowledge of what's going on. That was very helpful.
Great. Another question from Peter. Do you have any stats on health impacts from last year's poor air quality?
I was just going to say, Department of Health, I know, is on the call, Jesse, because I really wanted to make sure that the health impacts on the smoke was talked about today, because we had a lot of questions last year and we referred to MDH. So I will hand that question over to MDH if they may be able to offer up some information on that.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your great presentation and all this work looking forward. So my name is Jessie Schmuel, and I'm an epidemiologist at the Department of Health. And so I appreciate your question about health impacts from last year's poor air quality. We certainly heard a lot of anecdotal reports from individuals and from healthcare providers about aggravated asthma and other respiratory conditions. We got a lot of questions, certainly, about how people should be modifying their behavior during those events to prevent exposure. Right now at the health department, we don't have data in yet. There's quite a lag in the data that we get from healthcare systems that would tell us about emergency department or visits, admissions. So unfortunately, we are waiting for those data, and we do not have them. But for our specific events, but looking at the literature and what we can see from other places where they've looked at wildfires, both, where they've had both local wildfires as well as experienced smoke from long range transport, like we would get from Canada or something. And there are certainly, there's no reason to expect that that the impacts here would be substantially different from other people, from other places. And the literature is small, but certainly growing, and demonstrates that for both of those scenarios, for local fire, people who are living or near a local fire, as well as for long range smoke, that you would expect to see an increase in emergency department visits for asthma, for COPD, heart conditions, in the days following, in the 2 to 3 days following a very high smoke event, and that there is a kind of a dose response association. Some studies are even showing, in kind of in 10 unit increments of micrograms per meter of fine particulate matter that you would even, we would expect really even to see as we progress through those levels of the AQI to see more and more. So we are awaiting those data, and we'll be, when we get them, we will be sharing them out, in the same ways that Daniel reported, kind of looking forward to expanded and improved data sources. We're doing the same at the Department of Health in terms of having closer to near real-time data on those health impacts. It's something we've been working on for years. That's been a little accelerated through the COVID response, where in the coming years, we do expect to have more real-time data about the health impacts. We just we're not quite there yet, but we know that it's of great interest to communities and our partners, and to us as well. We really, those data help us to understand how we can be most effective in limiting health effects and where we can target our resources. So that was a long answer, but I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. So we will probably wrap it up there, but we will be sharing this recording on YouTube, posting it on our website. You can reach out to me with any media questions. My email is listed there. Anything related to AQI, you can reach the meteorology team through that email. So with that, we will conclude today's call, but thank you everyone so much for joining. And we look forward to collaborating with you all this summer.
Thank you, everyone.